I got married thinking I'd found my forever person. But somewhere between year 1 and year 3, my wife Melody turned into someone I didn't recognize. I'm Hunter, 38, project manager at a tech company in Chicago, making $78,000 a year. Never cheated, never gambled, never did anything that would make a reasonable person walk away. But apparently being a good husband wasn't enough. The change crept in slowly like mold behind the walls. You don't see it until the damage is done. We'd been trying for kids for 18 months, and every negative pregnancy test felt like another nail in the coffin of our happiness. The fertility appointments, the tracking, the scheduled intimacy, it all turned something that should have been natural into a clinical process that sucked the joy out of everything. The medical bills were crushing us. Our insurance covered basic visits, but not the specialized tests Melody insisted we needed. FSH levels, AMH testing, genetic screening. Each month brought another $800 to $200 in unexpected charges. The fertility clinic had payment plans, but even those stretched our budget thin. Between the $2,100 mortgage on our 3-bedroom townhouse and these mounting medical expenses, we were living paycheck to paycheck despite my decent salary. Melody started spending more time online, in these fertility support groups that somehow morphed into general complaints about husbands. Her sister Amber didn't help either. Recently divorced, living back with their parents at 33, and she'd made hating men her full-time job. Suddenly, every conversation felt like I was being cross-examined by a prosecutor who'd already decided I was guilty. Their mom didn't help either, always calling at dinner with comments about how her friend's daughter married a doctor or how her neighbor's son-in-law bought a boat. Subtle digs that made it clear I wasn't measuring up, despite the fact that we owned a decent home in a good neighborhood and I'd just gotten promoted. The promotion should have been good news, but it came with a catch. Monthly travel to our satellite offices. Milwaukee twice a month, Detroit once a month, sometimes Indianapolis for client meetings. 3 or 4 days away, usually midweek when Melody was tracking ovulation windows and fertility windows. The timing couldn't have been worse. Every trip became a source of resentment. She'd calculate my travel dates against her cycle, accusing me of prioritizing work over starting our family. When I'd explained that these trips were mandatory for the promotion that was helping pay for her medical treatments, I'd get lectures about emotional availability and how I was choosing my career over our marriage. The bedroom went cold first, not all at once, but in stages, like someone turning down a thermostat until you're shivering. She'd come to bed later and later, always with her phone, always with some excuse. The fertility stress became a shield against any kind of intimacy. That wasn't directly related to making a baby, and I tried to be understanding because that's what you do in a marriage, right? But understanding turned into weeks, then months. Every time I tried to initiate anything, even just holding her hand, I got the same cold shoulder, the same heavy sigh like I was some burden she had to tolerate. She started seeing an individual therapist, not couples counseling, just her own sessions that seemed to make things worse instead of better. Amber was over constantly, at least 3 times a week, and they'd sit drinking wine and talking in those low voices that would stop the second I walked in. I'd catch snippets, complaints about husbands, about men, about how women deserve to be treated like queens. Melody started parroting these ideas, making comments about emotional labor and mental load, terms I'd never heard her use before, casting me as the villain in some story I didn't know I was part of. When I'd suggest she come with me on work trips sometimes, turn them into mini vacations, I'd get accused of not understanding her stress. When I'd stay home and focus on her, I was being clingy and suffocating. There was no winning move in this game she'd created. Work became my refuge, which is sad. Looking forward to the office because at least there people treated me with basic respect. At home, I felt like I was constantly walking on eggshells, never knowing what would set her off. The mortgage payments, the medical bills, the pressure to maintain a lifestyle we could barely afford, it was all somehow my fault for not making more money. I started noticing things. How she'd light up when her phone buzzed with messages from her TTC Warriors group, but barely acknowledge me walking through the door. How she'd spend an hour getting ready to meet Amber but wouldn't bother changing out of sweatpants for me. How our credit card had charges from stores I'd never heard of while she complained we had no money for anything fun. My brother Owen lived up in Wisconsin. We talked monthly and he'd been asking me to visit his place on the lake. said I seemed stressed, needed a break, but Melody always had some reason why I couldn't go. Usually something about how I was being selfish, thinking only of myself when she needed support during this difficult time. The work travel made everything worse. I'd come home from Detroit exhausted, hoping for a normal evening, and get interrogated about why I hadn't called enough, why I seemed distant, why I was always putting work first. The irony wasn't lost on me that the promotion I'd worked so hard for, the one that was supposed to secure our financial future and help us afford the family we both wanted, had become another weapon she could use against me. Then came that night in late April that changed everything. I came home around 7 o'clock from a particularly successful trip to Milwaukee, tired but in a good mood because I'd just closed a major deal that would mean a $5,000 bonus, real money that could help with the medical bills, maybe take some pressure off both of us. I walked in expecting maybe we could celebrate. Go to that Italian restaurant she liked. Have a normal conversation like we used to. Melody was on the couch with her laptop, didn't even look up when I said hello. I told her about the deal, about the bonus, hoping this good news would break through whatever wall she'd built between us. She said, "That's nice," eyes never leaving the screen, tone suggesting it was anything but nice. I took a shower, came back in comfortable clothes, hoping the evening would improve. I sat down next to her, left respectful space between us, and after a few minutes, I put my hand on her leg. Nothing inappropriate, just a simple touch, the kind of thing married people do, the kind of thing we used to do. She jerked away like I'd burned her. "Don't touch me," she said, voice flat and cold. I pulled my hand back, confusion washing over me, asked what was wrong. She finally looked at me, and the expression on her face was disgust, pure disgust. "I have self-respect," she said, emphasizing each word like she was talking to a child. "I'm not just going to let you touch me whenever you feel like it." The words hit me like a slap, not because they were loud, but because of how casual they were, how easily she'd turned a simple gesture into something dirty and demanding. I asked what she meant, kept my voice calm even though my heart was racing. She rolled her eyes, closed her laptop with unnecessary force, stood up, and said she was going to bed. "You can sleep in the guest room tonight," she added. "I need space." Space. From her husband who worked 50 hours a week to help pay for everything. Space from the man who'd never raised a hand to her, never insulted her, never given her any reason to treat him like a stranger. I didn't follow, didn't argue, didn't beg. I just sat there feeling something inside me crack. Not my heart exactly. More like my willingness to keep playing the role of the understanding husband who accepts whatever scraps get thrown his way. I barely slept that night. Just laid there thinking about how we'd gotten here, about how the woman I married had turned into someone who could say those words to me with a straight face, about how I'd become so desperate for basic affection that a simple touch had become something I had to earn. The next morning, Melody came out looking refreshed. Made herself coffee. Didn't offer me any. Acted like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just told her husband that wanting to touch her was disrespectful. She started talking about meeting Amber for lunch, about needing money for new clothes, casual conversation like we were roommates instead of married people. That's when something clicked. Call it clarity or exhaustion from trying to make someone happy who'd decided being happy with me wasn't part of her plan. She asked me to transfer her $500 for shopping. Said it like, "You'd ask someone to pass the salt." I looked at her, really looked at her, saw the entitlement in her eyes. The assumption that I existed to fund her lifestyle while she couldn't even stand me touching her. "No," I said, simple and clear. She looked up from her phone, confusion crossing her face like I'd spoken a foreign language. "I have self-respect too," I added. The silence was deafening. You could hear the kitchen clock ticking, could hear everything except Melody breathing because I think she'd stopped for a second. Her face went through 5 emotions in 3 seconds: confusion, shock, anger, disbelief, and finally this cold mask I'd never seen before. "What did you just say?" she asked, voice quiet but dangerous. I repeated myself, slower this time. "I said no. I have self-respect too, and I'm not funding a lifestyle for someone who treats me like garbage in my own home." She laughed, not a real laugh. One of those bitter sounds people make when they can't believe what they're hearing. She told me I was being ridiculous, that $500 was nothing, that I was supposed to support her. That's what husbands do. I stayed calm, told her support goes both ways. Respect goes both ways. I wasn't going to be her personal ATM while she couldn't even stand me touching her. That's when she really lost it. Started yelling about how I was controlling her, manipulating her with money, just like every other toxic man she'd read about online. I didn't yell back, just stood there letting her rant while I finished my coffee. When she ran out of steam, I told her I was going to the gym, then to Bryce's place for poker night. She demanded I cancel, said we needed to talk this through right now. I told her we could talk tomorrow, grabbed my keys, and walked out while she was still mid-sentence. That gym session was the best workout I'd had in months. Every rep felt like I was lifting off years of resentment. Every mile on the treadmill felt like I was running away from the person I'd become. This meek version of myself who'd forgotten he had a spine. Poker night at Bryce's place was supposed to be my escape. Just me and 4 guys I'd known since college, sitting around a table with chips and beer. Bryce lived 20 minutes from me, had a proper poker setup in his basement, and these nights happened twice a month like clockwork. I showed up around 8, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The guys were already there, Calvin, Wesley, Shane, and Bryce, all good people who'd watched my marriage slowly suffocate me without saying anything because that's what friends do. We played a few hands, I was actually winning, conversation flowing easy, normal stuff that made me remember what it felt like to just be a person instead of a punching bag. Then, around 9:30, my phone buzzed. A text from Melody asking where I was, when I'd be home. We needed to talk. I ignored it. 10 minutes later, another text, more demanding, telling me to come home now. I put my phone on, silent and focused on the game. That's when I heard the knock on Bryce's door. Not a friendly knock, aggressive pounding that made everyone look up from their cards. Bryce answered it and I heard Melody's voice before I saw her, loud and sharp, cutting through the normal sounds of guys having a good time. She walked into the basement with Amber right behind her, both dressed like they were heading to a club, not crashing a poker game at 10 p.m. The energy in the room died instantly. Melody looked at me with this expression of triumph mixed with anger, like she'd caught me doing something terrible instead of just playing cards with friends I'd known for 15 years. "We need to talk," she announced. Not asked, announced. Like everyone else was just scenery in her personal drama. Amber stood there with her arms crossed, nodding along like some kind of backup singer. I stayed seated, didn't jump up, didn't apologize for existing, just told her I'd be home later. We could talk then. That wasn't good enough. She started going off about how I was ignoring her, being childish, needed to grow up and face our problems instead of running away. The guys were all staring at their cards, clearly uncomfortable. Melody kept talking, her voice getting louder, saying things about our private life that had no business being aired in front of my friends. She complained about how I never listened, how I was selfish, how I was just like every other man who couldn't handle a strong woman. Amber chimed in with supportive comments about how men always do this, always avoid real conversations. I let her finish, let her say everything she needed to say while I just sat there, chips stacked in front of me, waiting. When she finally paused to breathe, I stood up calmly, pushed my chair back, looked at Bryce, and told him I was out this hand. Then I looked at Melody. "I'll be home when I'm home." The shock on her face was something I'll remember forever, like I'd violated some unwritten rule that said she could interrupt my life whenever she wanted, but I had no right to boundaries. I walked past her and Amber, grabbed my jacket, and left without looking back. I heard Melody calling after me, voice shrill now, demanding I come back, but I just kept walking. Got in my car and drove. Not home. Not yet. I drove around for 2 hours, processing how she'd actually tracked me down and tried to humiliate me in front of my friends. Brought her sister as backup, like this was some kind of intervention for a gambling addiction instead of a man playing cards once a month. The drive gave me clarity I hadn't expected. As I circled through neighborhoods I barely recognized, past strip malls and gas stations, I realized this wasn't just about tonight. This was about a pattern I'd been too close to see. The constant monitoring, the public humiliation, the assumption that my time, my space, my friendships were all subject to her approval. When I got home around midnight, the townhouse was dark. Melody was in the bedroom with the door closed and I went straight to the guest room. I was done sharing a bed with someone who couldn't stand my touch but felt entitled to control my every movement. The next morning started World War III. Melody was up early, waiting in the kitchen with her mom on speakerphone because apparently this required reinforcements. Her mom started in immediately about how disrespectful I was, how I'd embarrassed Melody, how a real man doesn't walk out on his wife. I made coffee while they tag-teamed me. Didn't engage, didn't defend myself, just listened to them tell me everything wrong with my character. Melody demanded I apologize, said I owed her that much after the humiliation I'd caused. I told them I had nothing to apologize for, that I was allowed to have friends, allowed to have time away from home, allowed to exist without constant supervision. Her mom called me selfish, Melody called me cold, and I just walked away. Got ready for work and left while they were still listing my failures. This became the pattern for the next 3 weeks. Melody and her mom staging interventions. Amber always lurking in the background, offering commentary about male behavior patterns. All of them treating me like I was the problem that needed fixing. I started staying later at work, going to the gym more, finding excuses to not be home because home had become a war zone. I moved my stuff into the guest room permanently, stopped trying to engage with Melody beyond basic logistics about bills and schedules. She'd oscillate between being furious and trying to be sweet, like she couldn't figure out which approach would work. But I'd stopped caring about either version. The woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as the enemy in her own personal war against an imaginary patriarchy. My brother Owen called during this time, said he hadn't heard from me in a while, asked if everything was okay. I told him honestly that my marriage was falling apart. He offered me his place on the lake if I needed to get away, said the offer was always open. I thanked him but said I had things I needed to handle first, because by then I'd made a decision, not an emotional one, not a desperate one, but a clear-headed realization that this marriage was already over. I was just the last one to figure it out. I started researching divorce attorneys online, read reviews, compared rates, made notes. Within a week, I had a consultation scheduled with Diana Walsh, a family law attorney who'd been practicing for 20 years. The consultation was eye-opening. Diana asked detailed questions about our finances, our assets, whether we had kids, how long we'd been married. I laid it all out. The joint checking account, the townhouse we owned together, the 2 cars, my 401k, Melody's student loans I'd been helping pay off. Diana explained Illinois divorce law. Since we'd been married less than 10 years and had no kids, it would be relatively straightforward, likely a 50-50 split of assets, no alimony. She asked if I wanted to try counseling first, had to ask for legal reasons. I told her honestly that the relationship was dead, that I wasn't interested in fixing something with someone who fundamentally didn't respect me. She gave me homework, documents to gather, bank statements to copy, a list of everything I'd need to file. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I started looking at apartments that same weekend, told Melody I was checking out a new gym, drove around the city instead, looking at 1-bedroom places I could afford on my salary alone. I found one in Lincoln Park, nothing fancy but clean and affordable at $1,200 a month. I filled out an application, and within 3 days I had approval. Signed the lease that Friday, gave first month and security deposit, got my keys. Suddenly, I had an escape route. Back at the townhouse, Melody barely noticed my absences. She was too busy planning some girl's weekend with Amber to Atlantic City, probably to complain about their respective husband problems. I'd become invisible in my own marriage, and instead of fighting it, I was using it to plan my exit. I started moving things slowly, took a carload of clothes and books to the new place while Melody was at work. Another load of kitchen stuff, my laptop, important documents, piece by piece, dismantling my presence from our shared life. The Friday before I was planning to serve her papers, Melody's mom showed up unannounced. Let herself in with the spare key, found me in the guest room packing the last of my clothes into boxes. She stood in the doorway, horrified, demanded to know what I was doing, whether I was leaving her daughter. How dare I even think about abandoning her daughter when she needed support with the fertility issues? I told her calmly that I was organizing my things, that Melody and I were having serious problems she was well aware of, and that she should probably knock before using that key. Or better yet, give it back. She went off about family and commitment and how my generation gives up too easily. I just kept packing while she talked, didn't argue, didn't explain myself, just let her waste her breath while I folded my last few shirts and sealed the box with tape. I served Melody the divorce papers on a Tuesday morning in mid-June. Had a process server deliver them while I was at work, so I wouldn't have to see her reaction. My phone exploded around 10 a.m., 17 missed calls before I finally answered. Her voice was something between screaming and crying, demanding to know what I'd done, how I could do this to her, whether this was some kind of joke. I told her calmly it wasn't a joke, that I'd moved my essential belongings to a new apartment over the past 2 weeks, that my lawyer would be in touch about dividing assets, and that she should get her own attorney. She went through all 5 stages of grief in about 3 days. Started with complete denial, telling everyone I was just having a breakdown, that I'd come back once I cleared my head. Then came the anger phase. Text messages at 2 a.m. calling me every name in the book, voicemails from her mom threatening legal action. Amber posted vague things on social media about toxic men and women dodging bullets, clearly about me. I just blocked all of them. The bargaining phase was almost sad. Melody showed up at my office 3 times in 1 week. Security had to escort her out twice. She'd cry and promise to change, say she'd go to counseling, that we could fix this if I just gave her another chance. I told her the same thing each time, that it was over, that showing up at my workplace wasn't helping her case. She tried enlisting my friends, called Bryce, asking him to talk sense into me. Bryce told her he supported my decision and hung up. She even called my brother Owen, probably got his number from an old contact list. Owen told her flatly that he'd watched her treat me like garbage for 2 years and I should have left sooner. None of it worked because everyone who actually knew us had seen how she treated me. Then came her attempted grand gesture that sealed everything in the worst possible way. It was early August, about 6 weeks after I'd served the papers. I'd gone up to Owen's cabin in northern Wisconsin for a long weekend. Owen couldn't make it, work commitment, so I had the place to myself. It was perfect, remote, right on a small lake, no neighbors, for half a mile. Saturday evening around 7, I was sitting on the dock with a beer, watching the sunset, when I heard a car pull up. I figured maybe Owen had managed to get away. But then I heard Melody's voice calling my name, slurred and loud. She came stumbling down the path toward the dock, and I could tell from 50 feet away she was drunk, fully drunk, stumbling over roots and rocks, barely keeping her balance. She was wearing heels for some reason, completely inappropriate for a lakeside cabin, and some dress like she'd gotten ready for a night out instead of a 4-hour drive to the middle of nowhere. She was crying and yelling at the same time, saying we needed to talk, that I couldn't throw away 3 years of marriage, that she loved me and I was being cruel. I stayed on the dock, didn't move toward her, tried to calm her down from a distance, told her she shouldn't have driven in that condition, that she needed to leave. She kept coming, not watching where she was stepping, her heels catching on the wooden planks. I saw it happening before it did, like watching a car accident in slow motion. Her foot caught on a loose board. She windmilled her arms, grabbed at nothing but air, and then she went straight sideways into the lake. The splash was enormous. Her scream cut off instantly by the cold water. I jumped in immediately, not because I wanted to help her specifically, but because letting someone drown wasn't an option. Grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the shallow water. She was coughing and sputtering, too drunk to swim properly. She'd lost both heels in the water. Her phone was ruined at the bottom of the lake, her makeup running in black streams down her face. She just sat there in the shallow water, shivering and crying, asking why I didn't love her anymore. I got her a towel and some of Owen's old clothes, told her to change and sober up. Then I called a local cab company. There was no Uber out here. They charged a fortune to come this far out. While we waited, she kept trying to talk to me, saying Amber had been wrong, that her mom had been wrong, that she saw that now. I told her this was exactly why we were done, this complete inability to respect boundaries or act like a rational adult. The cab showed up 45 minutes later. The driver looked uncomfortable picking up this soaking wet woman in oversized men's clothes with ruined makeup. I paid him in advance to take her to the nearest hotel 15 miles away, told him to make sure she got inside safely. Monday morning, my lawyer Diana called. Apparently, someone at the lake had seen the whole thing. Melody showing up drunk, the yelling, her falling in the water. Owen had mentioned it when he came up the next day, said if I needed a witness statement, he could probably get one. Diana said this could help our case significantly, showed a pattern of instability and harassment. The divorce moved forward quickly after that. Melody had no grounds to contest it, no evidence of wrongdoing on my part, and no energy left to fight. We met once for mediation in late September, divided everything 50-50 like Illinois law required. I kept my car and my 401k, she kept hers. We split the furniture, sold the townhouse, closed the joint accounts. The judge signed the final papers in early November. About 7 months after that night, she told me not to touch her because she had self-respect. Last I heard, Melody was living with Amber, working some entry-level position at a bank, making around $40,000, spending her weekends posting inspirational quotes about strong women on social media. Her mom still sends me occasional emails with subject lines like, "You'll regret this," but I delete them without opening. I'm in my own apartment now, 1 bedroom with decent light and a view of the city. I have my poker nights back, twice a month like clockwork. I hit the gym 5 times a week, and honestly, I've never felt more at peace. My friends say I look younger, happier, like someone lifted a weight off my shoulders, and they're right. I spent 3 years trying to make someone happy who decided being miserable with me was more satisfying than being happy alone. Melody wanted respect. She got it. I respected myself enough to walk away. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a marriage is end it. And sometimes the person who claims they have self-respect the loudest is the one who understands it the least. I learned that self-respect isn't about controlling someone else or making demands. It's about knowing your worth and not accepting less than you deserve. And the day I finally learned that lesson was the day I took my life back.